Welcome everyone. I'm glad you were able to join us today. Bonjour tout le monde. Au début, je veux dire que notre présentation est en anglais, est une interprétation simultanée et disponible en français. L'icône d'interprétation se trouve dans le coin inférieur droit de votre fenêtre Zoom avec une petite globe graphique. Cliquez dessus pour obtenir une sélection déroulante de langue. And if anyone's worried, I'm going to continue to torture the French language much longer. That was it. I just had to make sure. Those who want to review this in French, that option is available. I also need to inform you that today's session is being recorded. But anyway, to start off, welcome. Thank you for joining us today's webinar. My name is Tim Stupich, and I'll just want to say a little bit of a background on that. The name Stupich, my father came from, or my grandfather came from Croatia. Ended up going to northern Canada, Dawson Creek, Yukon. Met a girl there who actually came from Prince Edward Island. They settled down in Vancouver Island. So east, west, and north, I've got it covered. I've lived my whole life in between in various parts of this country. And so I wanted to kick off this just by acknowledging that today I'm in Ottawa, Ontario. That the land I'm here today is traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. That I am thankful that not only myself, but my entire family history has been, we've been welcomed in this land that we now call Canada. Maybe we can get the agenda slide, please, Victoria. Oh, thank you. Just as background about, I'm the Vice President Business Development at CANARIE. And CANARIE's, we've been around for 29 years. I think a lot of people are familiar with our longevity. We've got really three main lines of business right now, and it's like supporting the high-speed, ultra-high-speed data network that helps enable researchers in Canada to conduct world-class research. Number two is we've always been involved in supporting private sector innovation and the adoption of new digital technologies. And the third area, which is a little bit newer for us, it's the last several years, we're playing a much bigger role in helping to provide cybersecurity in the research and education sector. And what excites me about today's webinar is we've brought these three areas of research, cybersecurity, and private sector innovation into one presentation. And at CANARIE, I think that there's a real opportunity to continue to build, take opportunities, do more webinars, and really look at what we can achieve through synergy in bringing together research, cybersecurity, and private sector innovation in Canada. Because with the threats growing in cybersecurity, it's really clear that we need focus, we need speed, and we need efficiency in how we respond. So we've got a great lineup of speakers today. We're going to be running through their presentations. I'll come back on to introduce the second and third speakers as their presentations come up. I also want to encourage everyone to, we'd love to have Q&A session at the end of this. If you've got questions that come up, you can throw them into the Q&A section as we go along. I've got CANARIE's Private Sector Innovation Program Manager, Eric Bickmanis, will be sort of organizing the questions in the background, and then he'll take over hosting that part of the session at the end with whatever questions come in. So to kick off, let's look at our first speaker will be Isaac Straley, Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO at the University of Toronto. So delighted that Isaac is able to join us today. He's the inaugural CISO at the University of Toronto. He was at University of California, Irvine for 13 years as a CISO and privacy officer before coming to Canada. So in his role, he's got information security, ensuring University of Toronto's network systems and information are protected and meet whatever policy and legal requirements. He's also responsible for identifying, evaluating, and reporting information security risks to their Information Security Council and universities, sectors, administrative team. He's had a big role in starting up an organization called CANSOC, which is now an integral part of CANARIE, CANSOC for Canadian Shared Security Operations Center. So Isaac's kind of playing, got double duty here, but we're really glad that we could have him because, if we say cybersecurity important, why not get a CISO from the biggest university in the country who's got a leadership on so many aspects to be able to come and talk to us today. Isaac, I invite you to go ahead.
Tim, thank you so much for the introduction, and everyone, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm actually, as Tim sort of highlighted, in some ways I'm serving double duty. So the first part of my speaking session here is to talk from the CANSOC perspective, and I'll give you a little background on that because I also currently serve as the CISO on CANSOC, and then I'll shift to my more U of T, University of Toronto specific perspective on the way about what I'm going to tell you from the CANSOC perspective, how we look at it from an institutional level in terms of making sure our programs are effective and useful for the research portfolios. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about sort of in this sector, research and education, specifically research for Canada. And there's a global perspective on this as well too, but I'm going to try to stick to the Canadian perspective. What's at stake? I'd like to talk a little about the threat actor profiles. Many of the conversations around cybersecurity talk a lot about the impacts. You may hear things about ransomware and about phishing and about all of these areas. I think there's a lot of good information out there, and I think it's time to spend a little bit of time, especially when we talk about how to apply security effectively in the research space, which I will posit requires a very different approach. I think it's important to understand the attacker profiles and their motivations. I'll spend a little bit of extra time on nation state. I don't like to sell fear in this space. It's easy to do. And I try to make sure that we are being forward-looking and enabling and positive in our messaging. But there really is a nation state component to research that we need to pay attention to. And I'd also like to just spend a little bit of time talking about the anatomy of attack, because I think it will help set up the rest of the conversation today about why thinking differently about how we deliver, especially networks, research networks, is really important. So very briefly, a little bit background on CANSOC. As Tim mentioned, CANSOC is the service delivery arm of the cybersecurity program for CANARIE. There's a lot of players in this space. This was initially founded by the NREN, our National Research and Education Network, and all of the partners that make up that excellent ecosystem, as well as 6 research universities. It's now grown to providing services in some capacity or another to over 200 institutions across Canada. This is universities, colleges, polytechniques, SAGEPs, the spectrum of the research and education sector. And we're really focused in this effort around detection and response, especially taking the curation of threat intelligence, trying to find out these things, the unique threats to our sector and the unique ways those threats impact our sector, and making sure that we've got a by the community, for the community approach to fixing and addressing those, especially trying to respond after issues become real, because as we'll see in the research space, we have to have innovation, we have to have high processing speed, we have to remove barriers. And so it's really important that we think about the full spectrum of how we manage the risk. And when we talk about the risk, I won't belabor the point. I think you understand, everybody here is vested in this interest of both research and doing effective research and innovation and doing effective security and risk management. But what I want to say is, I think the risks are outpacing our ability to implement solutions and address them. I'm going to also, part of my message today is that we have to have this flexibility in research, but these are the two, and there are other things as well too. These are the things that we're trying to balance. It's how do we do effective risk management, and our ability to address it is not as fast as the risk is moving, especially in the pandemic. And how do we continue to have this amazing innovation ecosystem, and in fact make it better? And I think that we can use security to do that. That's part of my message today. But for the CANSOC threat briefing, I do want to say quite clearly that I think the threats are enormous. So when I say threats, I'd like to focus again on the threat actors and sort of who these types of groups are. An actor is a jargon that we use in the security domain to identify a person, an institution, a political affiliation. It's not something specific, but we like to use actor to make it a little bit approachable. And in our sector, especially for research, we put them into three broad categories. There's obviously a lot of complexity behind this, but I think it's important to be able to simplify these issues so we can address them and or at least talk about them. The first is there are garden variety attacks. We call these sort of garden variety attacks. This is the easy to implement, doesn't require a lot of skill, addresses common vulnerabilities. There are a lot of toolkits out there that people with low skill can take and be quite effective with these days. There's a whole economy of hacking and malicious tools that make it quite easy to do this. And especially when you look at a lot of what we see around phishing and web server vulnerabilities in these areas, there's a lot of vulnerability management and sort of just system management and even sort of human behavior, although I'm less inclined to blame the problem on humans in this space. It's just sort of the noise on the internet, and the thing that we often spend in the security domain doing a lot of cleanup around and trying to do a lot of management around. And especially with research being a very open environment, we have to worry a lot about garden variety activities. The second is criminal, and this is really criminal enterprise. This is big business now. These are well-financed actors. They specifically work to target and exploit data extraction or ransomware or a lot of these spaces. And these can be detectable, but what's really challenging is to attribute it beyond sort of the garden variety activity. And this is something we spend a lot of time thinking about, is when is something, again, just the insecure nature of the internet today, and when is it something that's actioned by somebody with intent, especially with criminal intent. And these organizations are organizations. They've got HR departments, they've got programming departments. Obviously, those are the bigger ones, but it's real business. And then, as I mentioned, nation state, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail, but it's noteworthy that these are sophisticated, they can be difficult to detect, and often the attacks themselves happen over a long period of time. But it's not enough just to talk about the attackers. It's important to talk about what their motivations are. And again, these are just broad categories. So certainly frauds and scams, looking at trying to get money out of people. And again, this can be real low-grade stuff, and this can be really sophisticated. But at the end of the day, this is activity to try to steal money. You see this a lot with the ransomware activity that we've seen explode even more than it already was over the pandemic the last couple of years. There's certainly in our space, hacktivism is a big potential activity. So defacing websites, embarrassing individuals, somebody who's got some retaliation against an institution or an individual. But certainly the hacktivism tends to be more politically motivated, right? Research universities and colleges in the research and education sector, we have faculty members who take very political positions as part of academic freedom that invites a certain crowd to retaliate. Criminal data theft. So this is above and beyond fraud scams, but this is really, the big business, often data exfiltration, stealing data. Sometimes this can be for espionage as well too. So trying to steal data. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the nation state piece. We don't talk a lot about this, although it's becoming bigger news as we look at the geopolitical world we live in right now, but disruption, and in our jargon, denial of service, right? Trying to make these services just unavailable for a variety of reasons. I talked a little bit about retribution. You can also think about the insider threat as part of this. Some argue that should be a type. We can go back and forth on that. But in this perspective, especially with the research perspective, I tend to think about this a lot more from these three actor types. And the insider threat, setting aside things like accidents, which some people put in that category. I think a lot about this as individuals who want to get back at the institution, and then or individuals, again, they've got some sort of personal vendetta, and then also this was the way the security world was a while ago. It's a little bit different now, but there's still sort of a street cred, if you will, people looking for recognition to show, like, look, I broke into something big, or I did something explosive, or I made a headline. And lastly, and certainly not least, is threat to life and property. So you can see this in trying to expose information about individuals. You can see this in trying to disable or otherwise damage infrastructure. This might be, again, for political motivation. It might be just to see what they can do with it, but they can have lasting consequences, especially as things are more and more are connected to our networks. So if you're able to accidentally shut down a freezer system that's holding biosamples, that can still be quite devastating to the research and researcher, and potentially costly to replace and fix the infrastructure as well. I mentioned that I want to talk a little bit about nation state motivations specifically, and I again sort of bucket these loosely into three categories. So I talked about disruption, a little bit more digging into that. A big part of this on the geopolitical scale is looking at things like slowing down technological and economic progress. And sometimes this can be quite targeted. So certainly we became quite concerned during COVID-19 about the impact to research, and while no public information ever connected the dots on anything, certainly we identified this as a threat, and there was activities that signaled that nation states might be looking to do disruptive activities just to either slow the technical progress, so you can get one, company, organization, or industry in a country a boost, but also just to continue the geopolitical destabilization that we're seeing. The second is espionage, as we talked about. And in this space, there's really three that are the concerns we think the most about. So the academic espionage, first to publish. This is really impactful to our researchers individually for their careers. Economic, first to market. Obviously, that sort of goes without saying. And there's a lot of defense and military issues here. And this can be in sort of direct use technology, things that are actually weaponized or intended to be for defense. It also happens with dual use technology and things that you don't think of these days as potentially being military. The breadth and connectioning of our technology and our innovation really matters. And the last is financial issues. In many cases, we see nation states acting to evade, or I shouldn't say we see it like that, but the expectation is that, and the information that we're getting from government partners is that there are financial activities and open source intelligence as well. There are financial activities around evading sanctions, or even using some of what looks like criminal activity to fund weapons and programs. And so even if something doesn't have a direct impact to the research portfolio, I think something that we think a lot about is how can we make sure the ecosystem we have doesn't contribute to activities that we might find contrary to our philosophical and ethical beliefs. And to put a little bit more specific, I won't spend a lot of time on that, but this is very high level, so I want to give you three very specific examples. So the first is something called APT40. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I want to make these real to you. So APT40 is believed to be a government-affiliated, a foreign country government-affiliated actor or a set of actors that are targeting biomedical, robotics, and specific maritime research. So the belief is that at least 27 research universities in North America were targeted for their naval research in this space, and that this was directly tied to international naval military concerns. And they tended to use web server compromises as their particular avenue. So what they would do is compromise innocuous web servers to get a foothold in an environment, and then use that. So they might deface a website, and so you might think that, oh, this is just sort of a hacktivist activity, when in fact it was a nation state getting an initial foothold. And we'll sort of talk about that foothold piece. But once they got the activity, they were able to then continue to do something we call lateral movement into the environment until they were able to like in this case, exfiltrate naval research data. The second actor is something called Silent Librarian. You may see a lot of news about this. This tends to be a little bit sort of more focused at the institution than at researchers individually. But Silent Librarian is believed to be, again, a foreign nation state affiliated actor targeting research information, especially library journals. And they do a lot of compromising of user accounts to get this access or to do this sort of lateral movement. And so this again starts with pretty simple attacks, phishing messages and fake websites designed to look like the institution, might look like a library site or something where you'd be putting those specific journal credentials to get access to journals, and they use that to then be able to steal data from either the university or from our journal partners. And the last is there's a lot of these bears. There's Crazy Bear, there's Berserk Bear. This again is another foreign country affiliated actor, believed to be foreign affiliated actor. This one specifically targets energy, and they target both the energy sector, and they target researchers who work in the energy sector. And this is also something we think about, is it's not necessarily just our research, but our industry partners and the sort of, again, this ecosystem of innovation that we're looking to support here. And so Berserk Bear has been seen actively targeting energy research to footprint and profile the technologies that are used there. And the belief is this is for destructive purposes. So the idea is understand what the technology is so they can build malicious software to be able to disable it and to be able to profile these organizations. So if something went from a cyber attack to something, and I don't mean to be bombastic here, but elevated to cyber warfare, that the activities could be actioned quite quickly. And in a recent joint announcement from the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, they didn't tie these things directly together, but there was implications that Berserk Bear had activity from 2011 to 2018 profiling energy institutions, and then in 2015, 2016, related activity in Ukraine, so long before the Ukraine activity we're seeing now, but was believed to be done by Berserk Bear to disable that environment and infrastructure, perhaps testing some of these activities or otherwise impacting the geopolitical situation that we're well aware of. So we could spend a lot more time talking about threat actors and digging into those, but I think it's helpful to see sort of the examples of disruption and espionage and some of those things and activities. The last thing on the threat profile, and I'll be very brief here, what we look at is attacks are not simple, especially when you've got sort of a catastrophic and major event. But even trying to just manage the garden variety activity, these are not one and done activities. Often it's a series of cascading failures. And important to our conversation about research is we can be more strategic and thoughtful about where we place security controls and mitigations instead of just trying to blanket prevent or say no or put barriers in place. And so I think it's helpful to have this model. And again, today's talk is not about the anatomy of attack, so I just want to talk through it very quickly. So the first is there's this sort of reconnaissance activity, trying to identify, the target, trying to identify the infrastructure, taking a look at what's around. What's important here is that there can be sort of recursive or nested or multiple threads of this activity. So once they get an initial foothold, they can recycle this activity. And this model I'm talking through is something called the Lockheed Martin kill chain. It's based off of aerospace and aero innovation. There's other frameworks that can do this quite in depth. For today's conversation, I'm just trying to keep this at a level that makes it understandable in the few minutes I'm giving the topic. So once there's reconnaissance, there's specialized weaponization, and the idea here is building whatever custom attack profile or whatever commodity attack profile and tool set that's needed. So if you're looking to build a phishing message, you need the things to send out the phishing message, you need to craft it. If you're going to do like Silent Librarian and build fake websites, you need to make those fake websites. Then you deliver it in some way. This might be, a network attack against a web server where you're trying to exploit a vulnerability. This might be a phishing message. You can take this sort of broadly as you have to deliver it in some way. Obviously, today we're talking a lot about networks and network attacks, but this can go in a lot of other fashion. Then there's the actual exploitation. Just because you deliver an attack doesn't mean it's successful. It has to be successful. Just because it's successful doesn't mean it does what you need it to do. So you have to actually be able to, this is phrased as installation, but you want to get whatever foothold in the environment that makes sense, or the attackers want to do that. Once they're in there, if it's not sort of a one and done activity, then there's something that's called command and control, and this is sort of establishing the house and the environment, establishing a command center, being able to continue your remote communication with the environment. This starts to get into sort of these advanced persistent threats, these things that stay around for a long time, and then inevitably you get ultimately in the catastrophic failure situation, the major breach situation, you get to something, whatever you're trying to do, whether it's disruption or data theft or whatever it is, what you're actually trying to accomplish. So thank you for that fast and furious review of some of the threats in our sector and why, sort of the way, at least in CANSOC, we're thinking about it. You can get some more information at CANARIE's website about what CANSOC is doing and at CANSOC's website, and certainly anybody looking for sort of the operational side of security pieces, especially in the Canadian sector, please contact us at that email address. What I'd like to shift to is not the threat profiles and the threat actors and some of those risks. I'd like to talk about how we take that information from something like a place like University of Toronto and think about it in the context of research. because, as we're looking at financial systems and athletics systems and student systems and research systems, each of them really is sort of a different line of business, if you will. They're a different approach. And the approach to research is one that is really important to get right, because when we get it wrong, the costs are high as well. It's true in other environments, but in administrative systems, you have a little bit more consistency, you have a little bit more regulation behind it, you have a little bit more common technology, you have a more common decision making. In research, we have a very different profile and portfolio. And part of this is just the academic environment. So walking into any conversation about research is incredibly important that we recognize these are open environments where academic freedom and shared governance are real things that matter. We have an incredibly diverse set of people, an incredibly diverse suite of technology, and incredibly empowered individuals, talented world-class talent working on problems who otherwise are empowered to innovate and solve problems. And if we do security in a way that doesn't respect these issues, it can be catastrophic to the innovation, or it can just be catastrophic to our initiatives if researchers and others work around those controls. And so we need to make sure these things work. And I like to frame this in sort of an old and new way of thinking. And I think we're starting to get past this a little bit, but it's still good framing. The old state of security, and the one that I think researchers have often got frustrated with, is one where you believe that security is a binary state, that if you do enough things, if you work hard enough, if you spend enough money, if you say no enough times, if you put enough barriers in place, that we are secure. And this is largely a technical problem, and that there is a trade-off between security and convenience. And this is something that I think is sort of a red herring or a false dichotomy. At the end of the day, I think you can have both of these. In fact, I think you can have privacy as well in this ecosystem. And often some of the solutions are a solution in search of a problem. Like, give me a big beefy firewall and we'll put it in place and we'll say no to everything and then we'll start to poke holes in it. There's a time and a place for some of that activity today, but like our technology and our expectations, and a lot of that was built off of the idea that, again, you could say no enough times and our technology wasn't where it is today, as others will talk about. Really, to me, the new state of security is where it's managed risk, and we're really empowering individuals, and we're doing security by design. We're risk managing, so we don't say no to everything. We do a lot of different risk techniques to be able to manage the risk. And we understand, and you see it in the headlines every day, that bad things are going to happen. And what we want to do is quickly detect when they happen and respond to them. And if you use that anonymous attack, we quickly detect it in the middle of that instead of you detect it when it becomes a major breach. So we want to be able to, instead of just saying this will never happen, we want to be more thoughtful about where in that attack structure we place our resources and our efforts to be able to mitigate that. A friend of mine and colleague of mine, Professor Jones, who works at the University of Utah, ophthalmologist, well-respected ophthalmologist, constantly posts on Twitter about the frustrations he has. And so I asked him if I could throw this information in here, and you can see, he's got this really interesting perspective, which is, when security controls are built for security controls, they can seem or actually are orthogonal to scientific discovery. And this is a conversation we want to keep having. And more importantly, that this idea that you can't just lock it down. You have to have a very different approach to working on it. And you can hear and see this from faculty members who work in research all of the time. And I constantly check in with, essentially constantly, but I periodically check in with my friend Professor Jones about, what are your frustrations, so we can make sure that we think about sort of the way this works. But it can't be just about enabling research as well, too. I think research and innovation have to be first, but we also recognize there are regulatory pressures. The landscape is significantly changing, especially with international research portfolios and profiles. And there's a lot more people a lot more funders especially looking for assurances around security. And those assurances can be all kinds of spectrum of things. And there's also the real risk with it. I sort of put this in the research space, not as a security problem, not just as a risk problem, but really as a competitiveness issue. I think cybersecurity has become a competitiveness issue. So the principles at U of T that we work from, and these are not exhaustive, it's just examples for today, is first, we put academic freedom, we put openness, transparency, we put innovation first. And that this putting it first requires specialized solutions in space. We can't just have a one and done security program. Our sector is highly collaborative and collegial, and we need to enable that collaboration. the risk, as I mentioned, is really real, and it must be addressed. We have to balance these issues, and I think we can balance openness, security. I'm not talking about today, but we think about privacy and monitoring and all of those issues as well today. This is not a zero-sum game. We can do all these features. We just need to do them well and work with industry partners and develop industry partners who can work in this space well. This needs to be able to support highly distributed heterogeneous technology environments and empower researchers to do it. And I think especially for today, speed matters. When we're talking about high performance computing especially, right, this activity has to happen fast. And a lot of the traditional security solutions can slow things down. So based off of that threat profile, most attacks start simple. They find holes and they scam people. And so when I'm thinking about this in the model is, to me, a lot of these attacks are stopped with basic cyber hygiene and are largely preventable. But in this space, if they get past those initial barriers, the attackers, especially those advanced attackers, will stay in the environment. And our goal, if we haven't stopped them initially, is to find them before they do harm. And in my opinion, we can't do this through those traditional pieces. We can't, poorly designed protection controls really impact this space. So we know a lot of this can be stopped with controls. We know once you stop it, we have to have detection controls to find it. And we know that the sort of poorly designed controls, not just the old way of doing it, if you can use that framing, but you really have to design the right controls from the ground up. And so the approach that I posit is that we want to try to minimize the garden variety attacks, especially in the high performance space, with minimal processing overhead and minimal operational overhead. We don't want to give anybody the ammunition to say you've locked it down in a way that doesn't work, and we don't want to keep putting devices in line that slow things down. The second is really sort of focusing protection and detection controls, targeting specific use cases. Like I talked about, is don't just say we can stop it all. Don't just say we can just put this thing in place. Really be thoughtful about the way that we're going to use our combination of threat intelligence and use cases and threat profiles and all of these areas to build a model that delivers both a technical and a people and a process solution that works. And as I mentioned, shifting away from inline devices doing this, right? Having the traditional intrusion detection systems that pick up things on the wire, having firewalls that exclusively do real-time processing. It can work in many cases, but if nothing else, in a high-performance environment, it slows things down. And as we know, that's a killer for some of the high-performance computing research. And security controls, to me, are best when they're purpose designed to support research. And I think I'd like to encourage everybody to be thinking about this as an innovation opportunity in and of itself, not just from the research innovation portfolio, but from the operational innovation pieces. And lastly, amplifying the voice of Professor Jones and many others, researchers already dedicate their lives to understanding complex phenomena and making risk decisions. And what we want to do is build infrastructures and technology structures that support that, not get in the way of it.
Thank you very much, Isaac. That was tremendous. Every time I hear you speak, it's no wonder that you were named CISO of the Year by the CISO Forum Canada in 2021. That was great, and I mean, you did a dual presentation there. Fantastic. I'd just like to encourage everyone. This is a great opportunity. Isaac's here. If you've got questions you'd like to pose to him, pop them into the Q&A. We'll be trying to spend some time on addressing those at the end. Happy to do that. Now I'm going to move us on to Tyson McCauley, the Chief Security Officer and VP of Field Engineering at Rockport. Before I get to sort of the bio on Tyson himself, it was great that Isaac was talking about the high performance computing environment and the importance of new technologies, as well as people and processes that really help to put research first and to plan it in a very plan it and design things to support advanced research. When I first looked at Rockport and heard about their technology, it was about, for high performance computing centers, it's like they had tremendous efficiencies that you could save on, use less energy, greenhouse gas emissions. Like, oh wow, this is great just on that alone. And then as we looked, heard a bit more, and then there was Rockport was also offering process improvement, efficiencies of processing. It's like, Well, that's great. And now here we are. Oh, there's a security advantage as well. So that's where a lot of where we're going to focus today. When I heard that Rockport had done some work with Richard Yu, I thought, okay, let's bring this all together, have a good session. So I wanted to have that Rockport background. Tyson himself, he was formerly Chief Product Officer at InfoSec Global before going to Rockport. Was at BAE Systems as their CTO for Applied Intelligence in North America, CTO Telecom at Intel, Chief Security Strategist at Fortinet. So he's got a wide range of experience in all kinds of product strategy, corporate development, business development, and thought leadership in general. He's also, he's a researcher in his own right. He's got 4 books, dozens of publications, 2 registered patents, and he continues to this day to do a lot of work on engineering and security standards with the ISO and with Professional Engineers of Ontario. So just delighted to have you here today, Tyson, and take her away.
All right, thank you so much, Tim and Isaac. That was a great talk. I took a lot away from that, and it was a great segue into what I'm here to talk about. So I'll share my screen, and it should be in slideshow mode now. A little bit of background about myself first. In addition to what Tim already said, I started doing security in the early 90s when I was administering a machine at the Defense Research Center, and it was constantly being attacked. I would be rebuilding the machine because it would basically get destroyed. This is back in the day when it was all about creating juice and profile for the hackers. So I spent a lot of time rebuilding systems until I learned to harden them. And then I became a network administrator, and I spent a lot of time trying to prevent people from attacking systems and doing what in those days were fairly sophisticated attacks like SMTP relay attacks. So how to create firewalls manually on routers, and I sort of stuck with it. And so here we are today talking about an entirely new form of network security that it's really about removing the switches from the attack surface, but also about simplifying the operational profile for a lot of the systems in research and education, but actually any type of system as a whole. So the problem with typical local area switches, and that is the focus of this discussion, not the internet as a whole, not necessarily organizational network, but the cluster where you've got your systems doing the work, whether they're CPUs or GPUs. And in these clusters, there's that local area network, which is a prime area for a variety of different attacks. First of all, the use of switches centralizes the flow of data from source to destination as these clusters are working, which means that there's a confidentiality, vulnerability, and some of the most successful attacks, in the history of the internet have been about compromising these centralized points where you can siphon off data through what are called span ports or mirror ports. And it's very, very difficult to detect unless you've got a lot of inline instrumentation. And as Isaac was saying, that often doesn't blend well with high performance environments. There's also a lot of complexity associated with trying to address the security, the east-west security inside these local area networks, where the application of some technical techniques around virtual LANs, or increasingly the use of cryptography, TLS, between server to server, that introduces a lot of complexity, and complexity is absolutely the enemy of security because it induces opportunities for often very difficult to track catastrophic failures or human error. So what we're going to talk about is a way to reduce the complexity, because things like VLANs and TLS become less of an advantage, and therefore the expense and risk associated with using them may become something that's more acceptable versus the conditions we've got now. And finally, with these local area networks, you face what we call a large blast radius. If you lose a top of rack switch, then generally you lose all the servers that are connected to that switch until you can replace that switch. Replacing the switch is often a matter of hours at best, but in the supply chain delay environment that we see now, it can be weeks. Now, there's certainly the opportunity to double up, create what we call a redundant network. But that is very expensive. And in the case of research, there's often a prioritization on spending money on things that will calculate versus moving data back and forth. In other words, the networks often are not only non-redundant, but they'll also have what we call oversubscription, or there's a bottleneck at the top of each rack to the higher level switching environment. So overall, there's significant operational burden, which impacts the integrity, single points of failure, and of course, confidentiality is always a concern. In addition to this, as Tim mentioned, this topology that I'm going to describe has got a lot of benefits around congestion and the use and consumption, reduced use and consumption of elements like power, space, weight, etc. So what is this novel network that we're talking about from Rockport? It is essentially a network card. It's very standard. It's a very standard form factor, and it fits into just about any server. We work extensively with vendors like Dell, and it then creates a direct connect fiber optic network among the nodes inside the local area network. Everything past the card is unpowered. So this box you see on screen is unpowered. It's passive. And this contributes to a lot of security benefits in addition to environmental benefits. The performance benefits is a different story altogether, but it is part and parcel of the security. And if you look at what a logical representation of this type of network looks like, so this is a Rockport switchless environment. It doesn't look anything like that spine and leaf you saw on the first slide. It is really about interconnecting servers or nodes together in a variety of rings. In our case, we call these dimensions, and we can go up to 6, but the regular and the smallest unit is sort of 3 dimensions, where each ring, and these are fiber rings, these are physical rings, connect multiple nodes together, and you create this mesh-like infrastructure. And as a result, there is no single point of failure. There is no single point to try and impact or inject traffic. And as a result, this also not only provides security, but significant performance benefits. And with the absence of top of rack switching, you see the ability to refocus security efforts into things like the host or the operating system or the application versus having to try and balance and contemplate putting more inline devices into place, or more monitoring devices with more logs and more events. And all of that contributes to cost and complexity. And as it said on my bio, I also do corporate security and product security for Rockport. And I can tell you that less is more when it comes to security, especially if you can find trade-offs that get you to the same sort of balanced risk profile that Isaac was talking about earlier on. A little bit more about the technology, because it does impact the security, but essentially what we're doing is we're taking regular Ethernet frames. So this is the standard 802.3 Ethernet, regular Ethernet, no change to the host, no change to the software, but we break those frames into much smaller pieces. And that creates a very dynamic and flexible routing capability, where we can take these little pieces of information and move them through this mesh in a way that looks nothing like a spine and leaf. So specifically what is happening is that these smaller pieces of information can be sent down different paths through this mesh, with the software and the network automatically understanding the best path from source to destination, sending these distributed, we call them flow control digits, through the physical environment, reassembling them at the destination, and then presenting them back as a regular Ethernet frame to the host. So the host, this just looks like Ethernet, but to the fabric has not only moved away from this single point of failure, large blast radius, complex security environment to try and separate traffic, to something that natively looks for the best path, rotates the path on a continual basis, so there's no consistent path from source to destination. It's constantly changing according to the network environment, and does this on an automated basis. It also means that the need to constantly manage and tweak your network as you add more devices, and therefore literally have to manage the risk over and over again as you expand or contract the cluster and change those configurations. That is all automated. And as I said, in my mind, less is more, simpler is better when it comes to your security solutions. If you looked at this from a systematic approach and you looked at the vulnerabilities that you find in a typical local area network, what we're doing for the IT organization or for the CISO is really removing many of these vulnerabilities and allowing them to take scarce resources and focus into other areas. From a researcher's perspective, it also means that you're not being asked to try and manage or actually necessarily be concerned about these things. From an availability perspective, this network with the mesh is by default redundant and by default non-blocking, which means that there's no top of rack switch to fail. If one node goes out, the others will continue to function, and there's no bottlenecks at the top of the rack as you try and make your research cluster larger and larger, or you want to have machines across two racks working together on the same problem. Right now, if you're oversubscribed, that can be a recipe for very inefficient use of your computing resources. Similarly, with confidentiality, there's a lot of reduced attack surface. In fact, the attack surface is almost removed entirely because, as Richard will talk about, this is an exceptionally difficult network to try and tap into. And in the end, what we're saying is about 87% of the attack surface is reduced to the point where the risk can be deemed acceptable by a reasonable and well-informed person, as an auditor would say. But you still have to manage things around keeping the software that runs the network up to date, as with any type of software. And the misdirection of traffic on the right is really related to human error around misconfiguration, because as with any tool, if it's used incorrectly or there's some catastrophic errors made in configuration, then bad things happen. So to sum this up, the value we see for the research networks, particularly HPC, artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever they happen to be, in the data center or at the edge, there is no central point of interception or injection. And therefore, the risks associated with siphoning off traffic, large-scale eavesdropping, or even targeted eavesdropping or copying of information is very well mitigated. There is no single point of failure in the sense that the blast radius itself is limited to a single node. So if a node is brought down for maintenance or has some other issue, all the other nodes, because of the diversity of paths through the network, they continue to function. And in fact, they will recognize an outage within microseconds and continue to operate without any type of major performance impact, especially one that impacts jobs that maybe have been running for hours or even longer, and you don't want to restart those. The other point of this is that this is a very automated network. So that leaves time for the HPC administrators or the research administrators to focus on perhaps updating the software or tuning the servers or doing other tasks, rather than constantly trying to juggle the network and manage the security inside the local area network. So with respect for everyone else's time, I'd like to say that there is a white paper available on this Rockport security. It will be shared at the end of this, or at least the links will, and more than happy to take any questions at the end of this, but now I'll hand it back to Tim.
All right, very, very impressive. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tyson. I love the way you tie together sort of these notions of you gotta have the efficiency. Speed is so important in this area, and I just see tremendous opportunity to get the focus of having like private sector firms and researchers focusing on how can we help to address some of the cybersecurity needs of folks like Isaac and others at research and education institutions. We're going to move now to Richard Yu. He's the General Dynamic Mission Systems Cyber Lab at Carleton University. Richard joined Carleton School of Information Technology in 2007. So been there for a while, and he's got research interests, not just cybersecurity, but related elements, connected and autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, blockchain, wireless systems. I don't mean to embarrass you at all, Tyson, but yeah, Richard's got over 600 papers published, 8 books, 28 patents. So he's and over 10,000 citations. So I mean, very active in his field. He graduated with his PhD at UBC. He's been with Ericsson in Sweden and a startup in San Diego. And I want to just reinforce this notion of efficiency, because I'll tell a little story about, and Richard might not even recall this, but the first time I met him was a few years ago. And it was at a autonomous vehicle test facility in Ottawa. And I looked at one autonomous vehicle that was being shown there, and it had a hatchback, and you look in the back, and it was just loaded up with computing equipment that was all required to run their vehicle. And then this whole idea of less is more that you mentioned, Tyson. I went over to see Richard, who's kind of standing off on his own. It's not a lot of fanfare around him. And I said, "Oh, okay, Richard, like tell me about your vehicle and what's the computing system to power this?" And I'm thinking he's going to open up the back, and he just pulls his cell phone out of his pocket, and he says it's right here, and he pops it into this little holster in the vehicle. Tremendous. Anyway, Richard, sorry for that story. I hope I didn't embarrass you with that one, but I'm really interested in hearing your presentation, what you've seen by examining, like getting a researcher's eyes on what Rockport's doing with its technology.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, team, for the nice introduction. Yeah, I did a lot of work related to cybersecurity, to connected autonomous vehicles, and also blockchain and wireless systems. And you mentioned about this connected autonomous vehicles, but actually in my research on connected autonomous vehicles, our focus was on the cybersecurity actually. And today I'm going to talk about a very interesting research project with Rockport. Thank you, Tyson, for the generous support from Rockport. And also, probably you can see we have a lab name here. It's a GDMS, a cyber lab. Basically, it's a General Dynamics Mission System cyber lab. This lab was sponsored by GD, General Dynamics. And they're also very interested in the new technology, especially from Rockport, this switchless network equipment, not only from performance point of view, but also from security perspective. And what we did last year was set up a Rockport security testbed, and we tested the performance, especially the security performance. So there are several objectives for our testbed. The first one is set up the baseline, and then we did penetration testing. And after that, we have 3 major security measures. One of them is confidentiality, and second one is integrity, and the third one was availability. And in the baseline, basically we're using benchmarks with industry standard tools, and then establish the performance of network loaded and unloaded situations. And then we apply some open source and also commercial tools to run the script and to exploit any software vulnerabilities. And for confidentiality, we try to have traffic interceptions at any point in the network. For the integrity, we inject or delete traffic in motion through the network. And the last, not the least one, is availability, attempt to significantly reduce or stop the traffic flows. Test the redundancies of the network fabric. So for the first one, baseline, okay, versus the loaded performance, and we can see that from the performance point of view, the Rockport equipment show an average of about 7.5% of increase when congested, when the network is congested Basically, if you run the Rockport equipment, and you can have a 7% increase of the utilization. The success criteria here is less than 25% increase. The methodology here, we are using OSU, the macro benchmarks with IPROP3 for congestions. So this is the first one with the baseline performance. The second one is a penetration test and pen testing. And we are using some open source penetration test, pen test tools, and also some commercial ones, including like Kali Linux and Metasploit, and also Nikto, Nmap, and all of them, we run them on the testbed, and the performance is pretty good. And basically, the result is no critical software vulnerabilities found in our testbed. So the first one, the third one we run is confidentiality. So basically, it's an interception for the traffic. And here we have the network setup. We have a host interface, and then go to HIB, go to a network interface block, and then we have a target transit node network node here in the middle here. And for the Rockport network card is here. It's a switchless fabric, and using our tool, we can extract transisting data from a network interface block here. So the result here, no network interception or masquerade possible in our testbed. The next one is security about integrity attacks for injection. And we have a same setup here. We have a host interface, and we have a target transit network node in the middle here. The difference here is that we not only try to listen the network, but also inject, overwrite, or delete some information here. The HIB attack. The result is very clear. No network injection or deletion possible in our testbed. The next one is availability attacks. So here, the methodology in our project was physically unplug a node to simulate outage or failure in part of the fabric. So basically, we unplug one network node. So the finding here, the network remains fully optional despite the outage in one node. And for recovery time, it's less than very short time. It's less than 5 milliseconds. It's very quickly the network can recover from the attack. So basically the availability part is very good. Not only the logic availability attack, but also physical availability attack. And that was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Appreciate that. Excellent. I knew you were going to be very efficient in your presentation, of course, as always. We don't have any. I don't see any Q&A having come in yet. So there's a bit more time if people have questions. I just wanted to take a moment to, well, first of all, thank all our presenters. This was tremendous information. Thank all of you for joining us today. And this is an area that I really feel quite strongly about, that there's opportunities to bring together private sector innovators, researchers, and CISOs and CIOs at institutions trying to jointly look at challenges and how to address them. CANARIE is very interested in facilitating those kind of discussions where if others here on this webinar have other technologies you're aware of or issues you'd like to hear more about that CANARIE could bring to you a similar presentation, we'd be very interested in hearing from you and trying to arrange that. And if we've got no other questions coming in, we're going to, I think we can end off today a few minutes early. And thank you very much for all your time. And thank you for joining there. Well said. All right.
Thank you, Tim.
Great job. Thank you, Tyson. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Isaac.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.